During the Cold War, reports claimed the Soviet Union was studying mind control, extrasensory perception, and even psychokinesis. In response, the US launched a top-secret program to harness the power of the mind for espionage. Today, we uncover the strange history of the Stargate Project. This is Red Web. Welcome back, Task Force, to another episode of Red Web, the podcast all about unsolved mysteries, true crime, and the paranormal. I am your resident mystery enthusiast, Trevor Collins, and joining me hearing about this project for the very first time, Alfredo Diaz.
Boy, oh boy. Okay, I'm sure this is a project that people heard and have talked about, but it makes me think about the projects that are going on right now, the different government agencies across the world that we don't know about, that are just unfortunate. Yep. Yeah, I don't know. Like, there's probably different pieces of tech that are being tested that the world is just not ready or privy to knowing the knowledge of its existence right now. And this kind of puts me in that mindset.
Yeah. You think about 50 years from now, we'll be hearing about Project Brain Matter, and it'll be talking about how we can integrate AI into our neurons and things like that. But it's always interesting to go back. You know, we've uncovered MK Ultra. We've talked about Project Blue Book. We've talked about all sorts of Project X, Y, and Z. And this one is almost an extension of that. I think the government has, over the last century, had a really interesting appetite for what the mind can do. And I think it's worth exploring because if your enemies are going to be doing it, you might as well, just in case.
Oh, yeah.
Start picking tanks up with your mind. It's Chronicle out there.
Yeah, I don't know where I stand with, like, say a different opposing government is testing mind control and they're getting somewhere, even in the slightest. Like, do I want my country to also be on that path in retaliation? You know, It's rough. It's difficult because, like, then it comes back to kind of like a personal matter where it's just like, okay, well, if someone's going to invade my home with a firearm, I should have a firearm in retaliation.
And your firearm is your brain.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's like, what does the government do? Like, it's like, I don't want our government to do that. But then if other people are, it's just so difficult to make a choice there. You know what I mean? I don't think it's as black as white. It's like, don't do it. Because, like, yeah, I'd like to be able to just say that. But at the end of the day, it's like, if they're that far advanced, they're going to be using it against us. And, what are we going to do? Then again, maybe we just EMP them. I don't know. I don't know. It just sets me down a path of thinking, I can go, this is how I can go back and forth, right? I can argue for both. I have no clue.
Yeah, dude. This podcast has scrambled your brains.
I'm scrambled already. We just started.
Listen, that's the thing about this, like, increasing stakes of stalemate, though, because just like in the movie Upgrade that we covered on Movie Club over at redwebpod.com, Task Force, it is this increasing technology to better defense, better investigation, better offense, whatever it is. But of course, the opposition, whether it be criminals with police or international, crime syndicates against a country, the stakes always raise together. And so when one group starts to study something, even if it's not viable, the other group has to study it too, even if they don't know that yet, right? And if a super soldier showed up, right, somebody with mind control, somebody with remote viewing, and they were 100% accurate, I feel like suddenly that dam is going to break and everyone will have that. People will be studying it at home, meditating, hovering off their floors, trying to figure out what to do next. It would be a new era, but immediately the playing field would become level again. It's just a heightened level of conflict or stalemate, as I was saying. But this one's really, really interesting. Stargate Project focuses a lot on remote viewing, and the history of it is kind of scattered. So I'm going to walk you through all the different names that it once had before falling under the umbrella of Stargate Project. Then we're going to talk about the specific angles that they took, what remote viewing is, how it's classified, how they studied it. And then at the very end, I know there's a lot of opinions on if this works, if this is viable. We'll talk about that too, but we'll talk about some of the really intriguing moments where remote viewing really came to play in an accurate way. Cards on the table. I don't really find a lot of scientific evidence for something like this, but man, do I find it deeply fascinating. And part of me just always wonders, like, yeah, but what if? Or what if it could be Or what if we just haven't cracked it fully yet? There is a 1% of my mind that says there's something in there that's just really interesting, you know?
I mean, it's totally worth exploring, even if there's nothing in terms of proof or evidence. I mean, like, look at movies, right? We pay to go and sit down, an hour and a half of our time to watch these stories that are based off things that are even more far-fetched.
True.
You know what I mean? And I just don't think it takes it down a notch at all whatsoever. I think it's definitely worth exploring. I mean, look at UFOs. Do we really have any evidence of that? You know what I mean?
Right.
We got these blurry pictures and video footage of something in the sky, and yet everyone's, heavily involved in it.
Yeah. And it's not going to stop me from wanting it. I'll debunk everything I can.
Yeah. I want it till I don't want it.
Yeah, well, that's true. But that one little sliver where we just don't know, that's where we thrive. That's where our roots grow. But we talked about our Patreon page, and I want to give a few shout outs. It's kind of become a hit list. Fredo's out there hunting squonks.
Give me the names.
This week, I want to shout out 2 buff scientists. We got Jenna and Guillerme. And then, of course, our squonks, run and hide before you melt. It's TGYK94, Zachary Orr, and Heathery Stallcup.
Okay. Easy.
Yeah.
Easy.
Yeah, okay.
Done.
And of course, we are here at the very end of March, but Mystery Madness will continue into next week. Round 5's bonus video, the recap video for that round, will be going out this Thursday, and the final vote between... We took 64 mysteries that we've covered, Task Force, and we put them head to head, and we listened to your votes, your comments, and we are down. This Saturday is the final 2. So it's up to you. Head to redwebpod.com to support our show. Get access to Mystery Madness extras. Voting is free. You also get this podcast ad-free, lots of other extras. But with that, I want to dive right into Stargate Project. In the early 1970s, rumors spread about the Soviet Union studying various occult ideas and parapsychology. In particular, they were studying ESP, or extrasensory perception, that idea of the sixth sense, so to speak. Psychokinesis, which is the ability to move objects with one's mind control, and they wanted to see how these hypothetical abilities or other psychic phenomena could assist in espionage. Of course, we are in the throes of the Cold War, where it is a stalemate to the max, nuclear weapons aimed at one another with the United States. So of course, this is the era of seeing what they could do to get information and how to outplay one another. So of course, being in the Cold War, the US government and the CIA created its own research program of psychic abilities to get ahead of Russia. It's very similar to the space race, but maybe for X-Men, right?
Yeah.
According to the Defense Intelligence Agency research, the Soviet studies of paranormal phenomena in warfare were very extensive. And a lot of this is still very secretive, not to be released. No Freedom of Information Act requests have been granted. Some of this has been declassified. We're going to talk about all the things that have been, but there are some nooks and crannies where they're a little cagey about the details. For example, we don't know how extensive the Soviet studies were, but we know that they were pretty well studied.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, I don't know, is it never going to be fully declassified because of the fact that maybe they got somewhere and then it's a dead end, but it's still somewhere?
Yeah.
They know the right path. They're just at the beginning of it and haven't made progress since then. I don't know.
Yeah.
I could theorize on that all day. But yeah, I don't know. It's a government. Any government, it's just we're not going to tell you everything. You don't need to know everything.
Right. And if they say, yes, this is something real, then they just play their hand. So of course they're going to be very cagey if it's a actual thing. And if it's not an actual thing, if they say no, the other country's going to be like, yeah, but you're just throwing us off the scent, so we're still going to do it.
Yep, exactly. No one's going to believe what anyone says.
So research in the United States began for a program initially referred to as SCANATE, SCANATE, at the Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park, California. This was led by physicists Russell Targ and Harold Puthoff. So the program and various instances of it went by many different names. It changed hands several times, all before falling under the umbrella of Stargate Project in the 1990s. Now, I'm going to refer to all of this as Stargate Project, but remember, up into the 90s, they had other names such as Gondola Wish, Grill Flame, Center Lane, and Sunstreak. We saw a few of the reports out of these different group names. Sunstreak, we were reading a report about their remote viewing experience, but colloquially, I'll just refer to them all under Stargate.
It's a cool name. Also, it was a cool show / movie.
Which one?
Stargate.
Isn't that the show?
It was also a movie. It was a movie before a show.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, well, listen. Movie podcast about mysteries. I just failed the audience right there.
No, dude.
One I haven't
no one
seen.
remembers Stargate, dude. You know Stargate. You're fine.
What's interesting to me about some of these names, though, is it seems like they're so mundane. Like the things that you might see from the window of your living room, right? The center lane of a street, grill flame from like a barbecue, the sun streak through the blinds. I mean, you might as well call it wall paint or gum chew or something.
But I mean, is that like good though that they're doing that? Because then you could talk about it so nonchalant without anyone freaking
Right.
out.
When you see grill flame, you're like, maybe that's just Burger King working on a new patty. You know, I'm not going to look at that. Now, the research primarily focused on, like I said, remote viewing. If you haven't heard of that, it's the parapsychological ability to see or experience events, locations, and people from a considerable distance. And those distances can vary from just one room away all the way to the other side of the world, and sometimes across the solar system. And we'll talk about an example that does just that at the very end. So Scannate specifically involved remote viewing with coordinates. And there are different types of remote viewing. We'll categorize those once we get through the kind of history of Stargate Project. But in many cases, the viewer would be given coordinates and asked to describe what they saw on the other end. In other cases, the viewer was asked to describe drawings that were out of sight to them. That's a much more common, maybe easy way of testing it. Like, I hold up a card, you can't see what's on it, but I ask you, can you see the shape? Can you see the color? Describe it, that kind of thing. So in an example of this, there was a control subject one time that was given a priming word. In this case, they were given the word bunches. And so this person hears that word and they think on their own of what they want to draw. And so they draw a picture of grapes. Now this is real. This removes any bias of knowledge, right? The tester can't accidentally prime anybody with what the drawing is because instead of giving the drawing themselves, they're asking for a control subject to draw whatever they want just based on a random word.
Interesting.
So then this person would draw, in this case, the grapes, and then in another room blocked off from all acoustics, electricity, anything, any sound, right? A test subject was then attempting to guess what was drawn on that paper. In this case, it was a man named Uri Geller, and we'll talk about him more in a second, but he said that he described what he was seeing as, quote, drops of water. And then he saw purple circles before he then settled on the idea of grapes. And so I have an image for you now that shows the drawings, both of the control on the left and Yuri's drawing on the right. If you want to take a look at that right now. Task Force, this will be available on all of our socials at RedWebPod.
Oh, wow. That's pretty spot on. Grapes on the left, grapes on the right. The left one has a thicker stem. The right one has more of a like viney stem.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting is that it's about the same shape, you know, I mean, it's just a bunch of grapes and how else do you draw it? But the stem goes up and to the right and they feel kind of uncannily familiar.
Yeah.
Now, of course, this could be an accident or what have you, but in this case, the person on the left is just given the word bunches and then they drew these grapes. And then somewhere else, this person could have drawn anything and it just so happens that they drew a very similar set of grapes via remote viewing.
It's like really, really similar.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, this is what they're trying to study. They're trying to see if there's anything to this, if there's some sort of phenomenon where you can actually remote view. Some people talk about shared consciousness, all sort of that stuff. But the government hoped to use this type of remote viewing as a powerful espionage tactic in reverse, but also for things like counterintelligence or counter-narcotics, all sorts of things that would have been important to the country at that time. So across the Stargate projects, there were 3 objectives: operations, research and development, and foreign assessment. Imagine the lack of risk and lives saved that one could have by just, if you could close your eyes, enter a state, and then be able to see your enemy's state in motion. What are they building? What are they researching? What's happening on the ground, all the way from the safety of your home?
Oof, that's too much power.
It's a lot of power, but it seems very compelling. A lot of attraction to that. So in their continued study on remote viewing, the government reached out to 2 individuals. Ingo Swann, who was a Vietnam vet and an artist who underwent various parapsychological research efforts. He's also a psychic and an author. And then you have Uri Geller, the person who I just mentioned, a famous self-proclaimed psychic who became famous for supposedly bending spoons with his mind on television, also known as an illusionist, a magician, and a TV personality. Now with these 2, they studied the potential of remote viewing And when usual methods of spying were unsuccessful, the Stargate psychics would attempt missions. So high-altitude aircraft, satellite imagery, when these things failed, or when undercover agents were failing to get intel out, they would turn to these psychics and say, well, can you fill in the gaps of knowledge? Can you get your mind into the state and send it over there? And we're going to explore some of these successes later, but at its peak, Stargate had 22 psychics working for them. Some were military members and others were civilians.
That's a lot for like them to, I don't know. I mean, I guess like you want to take it seriously to some extent, you know what I mean? Don't like half-ass it, but it's just wild to be like, yeah, we hired a bunch of mind readers and that's their job. They're trying to read minds.
Yeah. Now, I know there's a lot of like illusionist magic that one can do to kind of, you know, when people like, so to speak, talk to the dead, right? And they try to access the afterlife. There's a lot of tricks that people can do. So I'm just thinking like, I'm wondering what this process was like, you know, testing people to see if they could accurately read cards that they couldn't see. And then anybody that had any level of inclination, they would say, well, let's go ahead and just hire this person. We'll get a bunch of people and then see if there's any like commonalities between each of these individuals. Because I imagine they're all working in their own rooms in their own ways and not sharing notes. And so if they're like, well, 5 out of the 22 said that there's this brand new tank coming out of XYZ city, you know, maybe that's something to go on.
It could, it's just so, I don't know. It's just really interesting for like, I don't know, the government to take so seriously, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Especially when, you know, we don't, well, on one hand, we don't have all the information that they do. But on the other hand, we're sitting here and none of this is openly substantiated by science. So it feels a little Looney Tunes. It feels a little out there. But also at the same time, like the government's got this like slush fund. They've got tons of employees. So what's 22 people if it helps with national security, right?
That's very true. That's very true.
So I can see that.
Might as well take a shot at it.
Yeah. And I think it just comes back to that old stalemate. Well, they're doing it. So if we don't, we could put ourselves at risk. It's an unenviable game, especially if you have people on the ground going, I don't know about that. Like in Project Blue Book, there are people going, this is nothing. All right. But we'll go ahead and go through with it. We'll study this stuff and then we'll go ahead and move on with our lives.
Yeah. I mean, you got to take a crack at it. You really do.
Yeah. Because then imagine if it was real, right? And maybe it is. Maybe we just don't know yet.
Yeah, you don't want to be behind.
Yeah. Now, the most famous of these 22 psychics was Chief Warrant Officer Joseph McMonigal, who took on 450 remote viewing sessions. So estimates from project evaluations suggest that about 15 to 20% of these sessions yielded information considered useful, accurate, or conclusive by analysts. So I don't know if that's a large percentage, I don't know if that's a small percentage, but out of 450 remote missions, about 15 to 20% of them yielded some sort of interesting information.
But like if their specialty is to try and like, I don't know, you know, there's like people that can read minds, you know, and but they like try and fish information out of you. Like I wonder if like, but then the government would be privy to that. So I don't know. This is very interesting. I just like want to sit there and see how the government approach it and how the mind readers approach it too. I'm assuming the mind readers approach it with all seriousness. It's just more just like, what does the government do to filter that? You know?
Right. Like if a charlatan was able to get in there and...
Right. And so I'm just like, what? Like what? Oh man, just the process itself, I want to know so much about.
It really is fascinating. And again, I keep playing my hand on my disposition. I feel like I'm 99%. I don't know about any of this. It's super fascinating, but I don't feel like it's substantiated. But 1% of me is kind of going, I don't know though. Like we don't know what we don't know yet, right? We didn't land on the moon until we did. We didn't have motor vehicles until we did, or electricity until we did. So it's like, I don't know. Anyway, so according to a CIA briefing, remote viewing was on a volunteer basis. Now, according to Annie Jacobson's book called Phenomenon, intelligence operatives were recruited using a personality profile created by Puthoff and Targ before then interviewing them. So kind of giving you a little bit better idea of how they found people. And these profiles were designed to help find people who had apparent paranormal abilities. So it was kind of like a multi-step process. People would volunteer, they would try a personality profile before they would then interview them and then maybe test them. And so you kind of get a little deeper as it goes. And maybe part of that is weaning out anybody who might be in this for the wrong reasons or might be a fraud, an open fraud, right?
Oh yeah, you gotta have some kind of filter process. There's gonna be people that are just gonna want to get in there just to cause a ruckus. That's just the way it is.
Absolutely. Now, this is where it's interesting. So the CIA is involved right away. But eventually, the CIA's direct involvement with the project would end, and that would be in 1977. And this came after a review of the program by psychological professor Ray Hyman, who called Geller a fraud. The US government still funded some of the research under the DIA, right, the Defense Intelligence Agency, but then they moved the program to Fort Meade, Maryland. The exact timeline on all of this is a little confusing, but the book Remote Viewing by Tom Riefet discusses research continuing in Menlo Park even after research started at Fort Meade. So it seems that there are two different locations now investigating this phenomena. So Stargate did continue across various government entities despite the CIA stepping away in 1977, and they continued all the way up until 1995 when the project documents were made public, once again by the CIA, for review by the American Institutes for Research. This culminated in the release of the, quote, evaluation of remote viewing, and this was on September 22nd, 1995, and this is the evaluation that I was referencing earlier. And again, this is where I want to reiterate that not every document relating to this program has been declassified. The program has been called, quote, beyond top secret by program scientist Dean Radin. And of course, as you come to a conclusion of this program, before we talk more about remote viewing and we talk more about examples, you have two sides, two very different sides of the same coin. Depending on the source you look at, the project has been considered both mostly successful as well as a complete failure. And that reminds me of last week's episode, Havana Syndrome, where you have, even in that, 2 out of the 7 intelligence agencies in the United States believing one thing, and then 5 out of the 7 believing something completely different, or that nothing nefarious was going on. And that's what's happening here, is that some people see this as mostly successful. There's some accurate things happening here, therefore we had some wins, therefore success. While you have other people going, this is entirely fraudulent, it is baseless, there's no scientific evidence here, i.e. complete failure, right? Mm-hmm. And some of those people say a broken clock is going to be right twice a day. And so if you have 22 people over the course of 450 remote missions, yeah, maybe you have some accurate guessing, right? That's kind of the two angles here. Where does your heart lie when you hear something like this? When you think about it, like part of me wants to have like the Dragon Ball Z energy, like maybe someday if I focus my chi enough, I can fly. But the other part of me is like, I'm grounded.
We all want to believe in something like that. I mean, I do, for better or for worse, until I regret it completely. But it's like, I go in a skeptic,
Yeah.
And like with anything like this, I think no matter what, even if like say behind closed doors, it was completely successful, there's always going to be people naysaying it,
Oh yeah.
There's just always going to be someone that's like far skeptical or believes it far too easily and just goes fully committed or fully against. That's just the nature of everything. I fall in the camp of like, I'm gonna need a little something more. I need something more. I'm not sitting here being like it's a waste of time, money, or anything like that. But I'm like, why don't you go back and start cooking a little bit more and see what comes out of the oven.
For sure. And we're gonna start breaking down what remote viewing is classified as, because I think this is really fascinating to dive into some of these CIA briefs and documents and break down their definitions and their angles. But we will talk about some of these successful cases within remote viewing, and from there, I'm very curious what your thoughts might be. But honestly, if I woke up and I suddenly had the ability to peer across the world or the cosmos at a whim, no, I can't. From the world's perspective, no, I can't. But there will be some signs. I'll know some stuff.
And then I'll just keep it to myself.
Yeah. It'll be haunting knowledge.
Yeah.
This episode of Red Web is sponsored by BetterHelp. Task Force, let's talk about numbers. Traditionally, in-person therapy can cost anywhere from $100 to $250 per session, which adds up pretty fast. But with BetterHelp Online Therapy, you can save an average up to 50% per session. With BetterHelp, you pay a flat fee for weekly sessions, saving you big on cost and on time. Therapy should feel accessible, not like a luxury. With online therapy, you get quality care at a price that makes sense and can help you with anything from anxiety to everyday stress. Your mental health is worth it, and now it's within reach. Therapy can be difficult to talk about, which is why I appreciate BetterHelp so much. It makes it accessible and a good starting step to figure out yourself and what you need out of a therapist, And the fact that you can change anytime is super important because finding the right person, I think, is the most important part about therapy. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 5 million people globally. It's convenient too. You can join a session with a click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy life. Plus, switch therapists at any time. Your well-being is worth it. Visit betterhelp.com/redweb to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/redweb. But with that, let's break down remote viewing a little further and then talk about some of those examples. So, according to a CIA briefing on Stargate, 3 different methods of remote viewing were employed throughout the project. First up is called extended remote viewing. So during this, one relaxes, and maybe Task Force, you can try this, I don't know. They relax and they allow their brain to move into the theta brainwave state. This is a kind of brainstormy state. You know, a lot of people talk about when you're in the shower and you let the water run over your head, you start to have all these great ideas. And it's because the sound of that water hitting your head kind of helps enter a state like this. And there's a lot around brain waves that are still being studied. I find it very fascinating. But either way, people kind of meditate to enter this theta brainwave state. And the goal is to enter, as I said, a hypnagogic-like state, or a state where you're just above asleep in a dark, soundproof room. So really the only stimulus you can have is coming from your mind. And this type of viewing involves focusing on feelings and images from the subconscious. Once there's a vision or a sense of something, another person might kind of ask questions of you to draw more of that out. But these sessions take longer than the other types of remote viewing. The second type of remote viewing is called coordinate remote viewing. And this has subcategories, so it gets a little detailed. But this type of remote viewing is when somebody is given geographic coordinates, and that's it. You know, a north, south, whatever coordinate system on the map and said, tell me what's there. And within this, there is a 6-stage process that was developed by Swan and discussed in the February 1985 paper called, quote, Coordinate Remote Viewing Stages 1 through 6 and Beyond. This was declassified in August of 2000. So one stage at a time. In general, they're getting more specific as they go. And I'll give you examples that they provide in their paper to paint a more thorough picture. So stage 1 is major gestalt. So an example here, you see land surrounded by water. You can kind of conclude that this might be an island. This is the broadest stage. And again, we get more detailed from here. Stage 2 is sensory contact, where you might feel something like a cold sensation, or the idea of a wind-swept feeling, like you can feel wind on your face. Stage 3 is called dimension, motion, mobility. And here, it's a little bit more vague, but they describe it as rising up or a panoramic view, or in our example, something like the outline of the island more specifically, where you can now maybe draw it on a piece of paper. Stage 4 is called general qualitative analytical aspects. So from here, it starts to get a lot more specific. Maybe you see live organisms. Maybe you see something that comes to mind like a scientific research center. Stage 5, getting even more detailed, is called specific analytical aspects, and then parenthetically by interrogating signal line. Which is kind of confusing, I'll describe in a minute, but the example here is that the scientific research center from stage 4 maybe takes more shape. Maybe it's actually more of a biological warfare site or a preparation site. So, like I said, it's not just a scientific research facility, but we have more detail around what that location is. And the paper talks about analyzing the signal one gets and not getting caught up in the first impressions, which can create what they call analytical overlay, or AOL.
I can get that because everyone has a gut instinct,
Yeah.
but then as like that settles, a good amount of time that changes, right?
100%.
Initially feel one way and then all of a sudden you're feeling the complete opposite, or the intricacies of all that's in between.
Yeah. And this really reaffirms, especially at this stage, when you're starting to get these details, don't just jump to conclusions. Don't force, right? Don't try too hard.
Yes.
If you're seeing scientific research center, maybe that's just what it is. Don't try to make conclusions because they might be logical, but they could be incorrect. They really want you in that flow state, so to speak. So whatever the truth might be actually has a chance to come forward, so it's not incorrect. And then stage 6 is the most detailed, and this is where it's called three-dimensional contact or modeling. Of course, as the name suggests, at this point you can build a layout details of the facility. Maybe you get further analytical contact with this location for what the biological warfare might look like. In this stage, most of the viewers go beyond drawing the destination and they build 3D representations of the remote location using clay, cardboard, poster paper, things like that.
Jeez.
Yeah. So again, that's coordinate based.
It's very extensive.
It's very extensive, and part of me goes, I appreciate the scientific method here, but also details don't maketh facts. So it's kind of like, I love how detailed it is because this is decades of research that people did. But I'm also like, man, I want to see a 3D model that someone built of someone's house that they'd never been to. That'd be some compelling information.
Yeah, that would be.
Yeah. And then the third type, a lot more simple. It's just called written remote viewing. So this is written and verbal, kind of like auto writing. In this method, individuals kind of enter that relaxed, focused state, and they intuitively gather information about a target location. So instead of verbalizing their perceptions, they document their impressions in writing, sometimes drawing. But this approach was considered less reliable than the standard coordinate remote viewing techniques used in this program. So the second type has a lot more detail to it because they considered the coordinate base to be a lot more accurate because you're putting your focus on a specific point rather than broadly out to the ether, so to speak. So with the history of Stargate Project and the types of remote viewing behind us, I want to look at some of the instances where remote viewing worked out. I'm really curious to get your instinct and your reactions to some of these because when researching, again, it was really fascinating to see all the different voices that thought this project was a smashing hit right out the gate, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they all sat right next to the individuals who critiqued this project, who didn't think that this was worth its salt. So let's talk about these. Starting up with the first example from Rosemary Smith. So in 1979, the administrative assistant that was recruited to Stargate as a psychic was given a map of Africa. At this time, a Soviet plane known as the Tupolev Tu-22 had crashed in what is now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo, but the military was unable to locate it. So I really wanted to contextualize things here. The Tupolev plane is quite small by aircraft standards, and the Democratic Republic of Congo had a different name at that time, is quite large. I mean, we're talking about a bomber with a 78-foot wingspan crashing in a country that's over 900,000 square miles, or just around 2.35 million square kilometers. And just to be clear, that is more than 3 times the size of Texas.
It's very hard to find.
Yeah, we're talking about a true needle in a haystack. So the question I want to ask for the audience here is, why seek this specific plane? Well, supposedly it contained valuable espionage information and equipment, so the government wants to get their hands on it. Now, after a remote viewing session, Rosemary Smith was able to give coordinates that eventually did, in fact, lead to the location of the Tu-22. It was within 5 kilometers of the coordinates she gave.
Oh, okay.
Christian, do you mind looking up how many kilometers wide and tall this country is? I did this for a later example because I want to really contextualize 5 kilometers away is not far, but I really want to make sure that we get it in the scope of the entire country that she was supposed to be looking at to see just how close that really is.
So, given some rough numbers, just going from the furthest north point to the furthest south point, looks like it's about 2,120 kilometers, and then going from the furthest east to the furthest west is about 2,000.
Okay, so within 5 kilometers that's within, how many standard deviations? I can't quick math. That is very close then.
Yeah, that's surprisingly close.
And I was even looking at the map because I was like, okay, well, let's see. What if they had one heck of a lake, or what if they only had, a lot of mountains and so city limits were kind of minimized? I mean, one thing I didn't think about was flight lanes. I don't know what kind of flight lanes a Tupolev Tu-22 is going to take with, espionage information on board. But I mean, if there's consistent air traffic lines, that does really greatly diminish the possible locations,
Yeah, I mean,
just trying to poke some holes here if possible.
Right, exactly. And how many guesses did we take a shot at before it was like, that's the one? Look, they got it. So you could definitely narrow down to some degree. But still, that's surprisingly close. I mean, it's a massive place.
I mean, that's really interesting. Even if it's like one of only a few, if on a rare occasion you can get that accurate, there's something there. I don't know. That's wild.
There is something there for sure. I like to see the consistency over different times,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talked about before about 15 to 20% being conclusive in some way, providing some helpful information. That doesn't mean that 15 to 20% are this level of accurate, that they solved a case or figured something out. It's that 15 to 20% kind of nudged the thing in the right direction that eventually led to conclusion. So as you said, I'm very curious what percentage are this level of accurate.
Yeah.
Moving on to another example now. Psychics from Stargate were tasked with assisting in the Iran hostage crisis. So on November 4th, 1979, same year, 3,000 armed students seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, Iran. Before this, the U.S. relations with Iran were tense following the end of the Iranian Revolution. The siege was a direct response to the deposed former leader of Iran being allowed to receive medical treatment in the United States. So, the psychics monitored the hostages and the situation for over a year, at which point one of the psychics predicted a hostage was soon to be released. So after over 365 days, one of the psychics decides, hey, one of them is about to be released, saying this, quote, "I don't know his name yet, but it's found in a deck of cards, and he has multiple sclerosis," end quote. Days later, again after over a year, Richard Queen, who did indeed have MS, was released as a hostage. And so Queen, being in the deck of cards, how do you get, I don't know his name, but I know it's in a deck of cards? I'm just like, how
do we get there? What is this? What is the science behind that?
Right. I'm really trying to open my mind here and be like, all right, somebody's out there remote viewing, what are they receiving from this location that says, I don't know the name, but I know deck of cards? Like, that's coming to mind. Like, unless it's like, what if there's some sort of alien mediator that's like, let me send some signals to this person, but be real cryptic, or a ghost with some knowledge is like, yeah, it's Queen, but not like the name, but like the card.
I mean, that's still very impressive.
It is. It's impressive, but it's like, overly cryptic.
Yeah, why are we being so cryptic about it? You know what I mean? It's not like we need the fanfare or anything like that.
Yeah. That's where I get, what's his name? John Edwards? Crossing over?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. John Edward. I had to Google it. That's where I get that kind of vibe, where I'm like, I'm picking up something over here, it's a deck of cards name, that's where that kind of tactic comes out loud at me.
They're kind of feeling it out, and until someone goes, yeah, and then you go,
yes.
Yep, there it is. That's getting stronger now.
Right, because King, Jack, all these things are names too. And listen, I love people like Dan Brown, mentalists, illusionists. I find all of that stuff very fascinating, but I see it more as performative. And Dan Brown has kind of like debunked some of these things, but also knows these techniques. And I get kind of cynical, especially when it's something so serious for somebody to come. I mean, again, they're trying to be helpful as remote viewers.
Right.
People like John Edward kind of prey on people. But I've seen these tactics as patterns, and I couldn't help but clock the deck of cards cryptic part.
Right.
But moving into yet another case, remote viewer Angela Della Fiora Ford was asked to locate a customs agent that was on the run. Now this one's quite simple. She gave a location of Lowell, Wyoming. Eventually, this individual was in fact arrested. However, it was 100 miles west of Lowell, Wyoming. For the record, Wyoming is, to do a similar size comparison, Wyoming is between 342 and 365 miles from east to west. And so when you're 100 miles off, you're like 30% of the state wide. And I guess it's interesting that they were saying Lowell, Wyoming, while Lowell, just one letter difference, Lowell versus Lovell. It's interesting, but we don't know what we don't know. Is she told that the person's likely in the Pacific Northwest? Are they told that it's likely in Wyoming? Are they told it's in North America? All of these things have different, wow factors.
Yeah. And you also they're trying to like fish out information. But then again, I was talking about earlier, you think that the government would be aware of this, or people would be aware of this, and then just kind of go, okay, what's being fished here out of me?
Yeah.
With what little hints I have. You'd like to think that they're smarter than that, to just kind of be like, fall for the traps of like, oh, I'm sensing something. Oh, is it this? Oh, yeah, it is.
Like they can kind of, from the investigator who doesn't have all the answers, but they have some of the knowledge, they're kind of pulling some of that knowledge to make their remote viewing more accurate, you're kind of saying?
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, to just go in completely blind like that,
Yeah.
A remote view, it's just, maybe it is there, maybe there's someone that can see something that that we can't, sense something that we can't. But it's just wild to me, the theory of just, pulling stuff, remote viewing.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't know where he's at, but I know he's wearing Dior Sauvage. I can smell him,
Yeah.
Like that kind of stuff would be really interesting if that was accurate, too.
Right.
So that one's a little interesting, but this next one is easily my favorite. It's April 27th, 1973, and there's a remote viewing instance with Ingo Swann, and he is viewing Jupiter. Okay, he claims that after 30 minutes of silence, it took him about 3 minutes to see Jupiter clearly. He's closing his eyes, he's got his mind telescope wide open. Swann reported a distinct ring around Jupiter, similar to Saturn's rings. Okay, so Saturn, for crash course science, Saturn's the one with the big, beautiful rings that we all know of. Jupiter, the biggest gas giant in our solar system, lots of moons, gorgeous planet. And he says that he sees a ring around it. He also describes seeing what he called crystals in and around this planet. So, just so you know, Jupiter does in fact have a ring. It's very small, very hard to see from here on Earth. But Jupiter's ring was not officially discovered by astronomers until 1979. So 6 years later, during a flyby by Voyager 1. Now again, this is where I want to sniff out some wrinkles and try to figure this out. And I would say that maybe this is an educated guess, right? Because we know that all the gas giants in our solar system have rings. Obviously Jupiter has the rings. That was first seen in 1610. But what's interesting is at this point in time in 1973, we didn't know that. We knew Jupiter, but Uranus's ring wasn't discovered until 1977, and Neptune's wasn't discovered until 1984. And so he's saying Jupiter's got a ring on it, I can see it, and I see these crystals. And that would be, maybe he's making a guess on something that we wouldn't be able to prove for years.
Right.
Or maybe he's seeing something.
Can you just imagine though? You'd be like, this planet up there, that other one, that also has rings. Like, okay, sure, buddy. Sure.
Yeah.
We've seen the other one with the rings. Why wouldn't we see that one? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So maybe that's us right now. Just like, sure, okay, all right.
Uh-huh.
Distance reading. Okay, sure, buddy. It's just like, a thing where it's like common later on where certain people have that ability. I don't know.
Right. So it's either just a really bold guess that he goes, whatever, you can't prove or debunk me for years to come, so I'm just going to throw it out there, or he's seeing something. Now, regarding these so-called crystals that he mentioned, NASA's Galileo confirmed that there are in fact ammonia crystals on Jupiter as well. And I'll quote NASA here, quote, "The gas planet likely has 3 distinct cloud layers in its skies that, taken together, span about 44 miles or 71 kilometers. The top cloud is probably made of ammonia ice, while the middle layer is likely made of ammonium hydrosulfide crystals. The innermost layer may be made of water ice and vapor." End quote. So crystals could be a lot of things, could be stones, could be gems, could be ice, but he's pointing them out and it turns out it's accurate. So again, is this a educated guess? Is it a lucky guess? Or is he actually seeing it? I don't know, but I love this one because it's space.
Yeah, it's space. I mean, you think it would be an educated guess, though, right? Like someone that's read up on theories about the different planets and everything like that.
Yeah.
And they're just kind of, because, of course we had theories far before it was proven.
I will say, 2001: A Space Odyssey, incredible book, incredible film, totally different from each other, I will say. That book came out in 1968, and what I loved about it is that Arthur C. Clarke explores this exact stuff, and he doesn't necessarily get into there's a ring on Jupiter, but what he does explore through the lens of David in that story, right? I'm sorry, I can't do that, Dave. That whole David is like when he becomes the Star Child, which is very kind of cryptic in the movie, but very clear in the book. He's jumping around the solar system, exploring all pieces of these planets, and he does go to Jupiter, and he sees like a diamond the size of Earth in the center of the planet, and he's going through the cloud layers and exploring all this stuff. So I will say that even from a public standpoint, this could be an educated guess. I'm contextualizing it in what is really broadly known as far as like gas giants and what we know now versus then. So you might be right. There could still be a level of well-read, educated guesswork happening, because even just reading that book 5 years prior to his remote viewing could make him sound like really prophetic, because Arthur C. Clarke had a way of, just taking science, applying it, and being very correct. Like his predictions, his foresight was just incredible. That's why I love his books. But so yeah, I don't know. room for wrinkle.
There's room for wrinkles, and I think that's kind of where I lean towards, where it's just like, they've read books, they've seen theories, and they're taking a shot at it.
Yeah. But man, do I want it to be real, because I want to become Star Child. I want to go look at Europa with my eyes. Man, that would be cool. Be an astronaut just in my bedroom.
That'd be something.
It's brain VR, you know?
It's too much. It'd be people, because people would try and use it for other things. People would try and abuse it so fast.
Yeah. I mean, like, think of all the knowledge that people just shouldn't have, and they could just pop over your shoulder and read your social security number, or read your essay, or all the other sinister and nefarious things that one could do. Oh man.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
I don't want this to be a thing anymore. I don't want this to be real. Maybe just the good ones. Maybe you got to pass a moral test before you get this ability, you know?
Oh, even the best you know what I mean? Can be easily corrupted.
Yeah.
I mean,
Superman.
how many people do we have with responsibilities to authority too, and then all of a sudden it's just like, oh no, you've abused that power.
Yeah.
Or if you haven't done right.
Mm-hmm. Now, one last example before we start to wrap out. There was another prominent and early remote viewer named Pat Price. They were given coordinates of a, quote, Soviet site of great interest, end quote. And this was in Kazakh SSR in 1974. Now, Price was given coordinates and told that the target was 25 to 30 miles southwest of a river. Now, I have an image for you. Go ahead and open it up. Take a look there, Fredo. There's two of them for you. Now, Price described and drew an 8-wheel gantry crane, a layout of silos, and a room within a building that contained a, quote, 60-foot diameter metal sphere, end quote. And it was made up of thick metal gore, as he described it. Kind of like an orange peel, he said. So go ahead and take a look at that gantry. And the second image, I believe, is the kind of peel layer.
So this is like the base that he envisioned?
This is what he's seeing during his remote viewing. Yeah, he's given coordinates. Hey, it's 25 to 30 miles south of a river in this country, or this area, I should say, the Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic in 1974. And this is what he was seeing. Very detailed, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's got the whole entire layout of the base.
Mm-hmm.
And then that does look like a peel.
Yeah. He said that whoever put this together had trouble welding it and were, quote, looking for lower temperature welding material, end quote. And later, they were told that this was a nuclear weapons testing facility, and that 3 years later, in fact, a magazine called Aviation Weekly reported, quote, the sphere, which was about 58 feet in diameter, was intended to capture and store energy from nuclear-driven explosives or pulse power generators, end quote. Basically saying that, I think this reads to me, it reads almost like the government had a kind of inkling for what this was, but they didn't want to let Pat Price in on the greater details. They wanted to say, hey, go to a remote viewing session in this generic area. I'll tell you it's near a river, but not too close. Tell me what you see. Now, information could have slipped to him, and maybe that's how some of this is accurate. You know, there is room for that. But the fact that he just in isolation came up with something that was pretty close to what they knew was in that area, or they knew vaguely about a weapons testing facility, not maybe the details, is very interesting, I think.
I think it is very interesting. I feel like this would be something that is a thing now. You know what I mean? I feel like I would just run like a million tests. Like, here's 100 remote viewings of something that's on the other side of this wall, and just see how accurate that is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not to say they didn't do that, but there was the grape stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It could have been part of the testing and interview process to find candidates.
Yeah, it totally could have been. Oh man, I want to believe, but it's just so out there, bro. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's interesting. I would hire about 100 people and then get them all to go be contestants on Deal or No Deal.
Oh my God, yes.
Everyone that pulls the $1 million case gets pulled into the Stargate Project.
Yeah, there you go. Just copy Deal or No Deal. Seriously. Even then, it's just like, I'm sensing a big number, and he just whittles it down. Sensing an even bigger number.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm sensing a smallest number. That one. That's $1 million. Damn it.
Yeah, right. Okay, you're out. You got to get out of here.
That guy's out of here.
Could you imagine though, somebody perfects Deal or No Deal, and they're like, that guy's on something. He knows something. He's like, he nails the $1, $2, $5, $10 bags all at the top.
Oh yeah. I mean, they'd question the hell out of it.
Yeah. All right. So those are some of the cases, right, out of the 450 plus missions of remote viewing that have been undertaken that were relatively successful, right? We don't really know how many were considered successes, a lot of this still being classified. And this does sound like a drop in the bucket. I can't deny that, but I find it deeply fascinating. And as we come to a close, I want to carry some of this thinking into the modern day because there was a man named Robert Monroe who was following a similar line of research on his own. Now, this was happening concurrent to the CIA's stuff. He was a radio broadcaster and he was studying psi phenomena himself. And it's almost like a gateway to an entire other topic, which maybe will be its own episode. But I do want to end kind of with him. So he was interested in how sound frequencies could affect the brain, particularly in expanding states of consciousness and what's called the sleep learning, right? So this was an old idea, some people still subscribe to it, that one can passively learn while asleep. This was explored in Dexter's lab when he's trying to learn French while sleeping, and all he learns is omelette du fromage. Yeah, cheese omelet. Now, this path of study and research kind of eventually led him to coining the term of out-of-body experience, which I think is a staple in any home. I think we all know what that means now, but it is a result of this expanded consciousness. And it is very similar to remote viewing. He actually went on to found what was called the Monroe Institute. It still exists today. And in June of 1983, the CIA published a report from Army Commander Wayne McDonnell. And McDonnell was tasked to learn about and assess the potential uses of Monroe's so-called gateway experience. Now, if you've heard of this, okay, so McDonnell's writings and methods for accessing this so-called gateway are still used in online communities today. And Fredo, I know your algorithm is completely different than mine. Mine is completely riddled with sometimes pseudoscience, sometimes paranormal, sometimes stuff like this, and a lot of times true crime and unsolved mysteries. But this is in reference to something called the Gateway Tapes. A crash course here because, again, this could be a whole new episode. It's a series of audio recordings designed to help guide listeners into altered states of consciousness, using binaural beats, helping them achieve deep relaxation, heightened awareness, and an out-of-body experience. So from this state of consciousness, people have experienced anything from ego death, where they're kind of actualizing themselves, right?
Oh.
There's a whole other thing I could go into.
Okay.
Or they've remote viewed, or they have dream walked, or it just helps them meditate. But a long way of saying there are online communities that almost religiously observe these gateway tapes. I think they're accessible online, and they talk about the benefits of using these things. And it's less for remote viewing and more for this internal meditation kind of thing. It's really fascinating.
I mean, I could definitely see frequencies messing. I mean, look at the last episode we did. You know, we talked about, was it one of the theories was crickets?
Crickets, yeah, absolutely.
It's causing a lot of physical issues.
Or even just accidental dissonant waves, just causing nausea, and pain.
Yeah, I mean, so it's a thing. So I could see that. I feel like it might be more sensation than anything else, and you feel something, and then your mind just kind of flows into it, type of
Sure,
thing.
yeah.
But it's interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of, again, pre-science, pseudoscience, unsubstantiated talk about like vibrations and sound. There's definitely something there, but a lot of people kind of, I don't know, it's fascinating. It's early days on that front. There's nothing conclusive, but I do still find it interesting.
Oh, yeah.
But to come to a close here, the Monroe Institute continues to teach classes to this day. And regarding Stargate, right, we know that, or supposedly know that the project ended in 1995, but many maintain that there are rumors that Stargate might continue all the way to this day, that maybe there were secret successes and they wanted to continue to research that under the guise of, nope, there's nothing here, don't worry about it. It is a farce, it's fake, it's nothing, and yet they keep tinkering away. But that is Stargate Project.
I mean, that's what you think it would be, right? Like, I don't know if they necessarily just gave it up completely. It might just be like two people and they're just they got some resources and they're trying to figure that stuff out. But yeah, I mean, remote viewing is just such a wild theory. And I mean, who's to say that there might just be some kind of mutant gene that triggers within people? You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know, in some way, shape, or form, people evolve. I think we will evolve.
Yeah.
At least in a mental capacity, I feel like. Physically, I don't know. We might be like Wall-E sitting in chairs and getting just shoved around.
Oh no.
Yeah, I feel like if people could sit down and just have that chair be highly maneuverable and just dock into different things to help them do things. I don't know, man. I feel like a lot of people would choose that.
Just the idea you say of docking into something just to do some activity or something. I'm just like,
man.
oh, this idea that we become like, I was even picturing that you were saying we were already there. Like we were in some sort of simulation and our bodies are just like jello and we're just like,
oh God, a battery.
A battery. What was that Bruce Willis movie? Like where they're all like, they're not in their real bodies. They're in like the robot versions of their bodies. That's what I was picturing. I was like, oh no, I don't want to be dreaming and being a fake version of me.
It's not 12 Monkeys. Is that
Surrogates?
Surrogate. Yep.
Surrogates. Yeah.
It's like sovereign. Somebody, not sovereign. It's just
But coming back to this remote viewing thing, I mean, you and I tried something like this where we tried to do a sensory deprivation technique known as the Gansfield experiment, where you mute what you're seeing, you have this red light pouring over you, and you just try to tune out. You know, you have a white noise or a pink noise in your ears, and you tried to send me signals. I tried to send you signals to see if we could send each other a picture. And again, I find it wildly fascinating. I think if there's like a mental Bluetooth that we can all tap into, I think that'd be really, really cool. But once you crack that open, man, the world becomes a different place. So,
oh yeah,
I don't know. But yeah, Task Force, let us know what you think. This has been Stargate Project. Any final thoughts, Fredo?
Take a crack at it.
Yeah, get out there.
Concentrate real hard. Try and find something. I don't know, in Area 51.
Fredo's holding a Pokemon card in his hand right now.
What is it?
What is it? I choose you, Charmander. Is that
Is that it? I don't know. Spoiler alert, it's Licky Licky.
I forgot about that one. All right, well, I did have a whole anecdote I wanted to go into. Maybe I'll save that because we're at time here. Maybe I'll save that for the Task Force members over on Patreon. I feel like I have a Mandela effect with a false memory about like kids being tested with this sort of stuff when we were going through elementary school, but I'll save that for a story time over there. If that sounds interesting to you, head to redwebpod.com to find that whenever it goes up, but also to support the show. Like I said, we're in the midst of Mystery Madness. Come get your votes in. Free members all get to send their votes in. We really want to make sure we hear from all of you. And then as a bonus, we will have exclusive recaps for the rounds, reacting to your comments and all the results every single week. Polls go up on Saturday, and then reaction videos go up every Thursday, all the way into April. But with that, Fredo, I'll see you right back here next Monday for yet another mystery.